Glad to have you here talking with us today, and I'm so excited to talk about detoxification as it relates to PTSD. So I guess a little background first. How did you get into this work that you do today? I think your story is really relevant to our listeners and how you came to do what you do today.
Yeah, I didn't choose it. It chose me. How does this all even apply, right? It's the body doesn't know the difference of stress, physical, chemical, emotional. And it goes through that same wiring and process. And we'll get into that. But my story was a chemical stress. And typically what we see is a perfect storm. You have three stressors come together and then boom, it's a catastrophic storm that kills millions, right? But same with this, right? When people end up with PTSD or any condition they don't like, there was a perfect storm. It could be a physical stress, emotional, chemical, or two of each, any combination of three stressors, the bottom falls off. That's what happened to me. I was training I was at my highest level of fitness, training for cycling racing. And I was putting in a lot of miles, which keep in mind, that's a physical stress. And didn't realize this, but I was living in a low grade mold exposure at the time. Not terrible. Could have probably lived there longer without having symptoms, but I had also some silver fillings removed at that time, and it released a lot of mercury. A few days later is when fatigue started, but I never correlated with that. I just thought it was random or, whatever. Matter of fact, I think I thought I was just reacting to the anesthetic that they used. But it went from fatigue to anxiety, panic attacks, food intolerances, allergic to everything, insomnia to the point of anxiety, debilitating in the middle of the night. This whole hormonal spiral. My thyroid, my hair was thinning. All this stuff happening. And like most, I tried to address the thyroid, the adrenals, and what's going on. And some things may have improved, but I was getting worse ultimately. And only to realize years later, okay, there was this, perfect storm that occurred. And I found Mad Hatter's disease online. And that means that people that were making felt hats were mercury poisoned. And I realized, oh, this is me. I did a blood test. It was negative. And it was about a year later, I was working with a very bright endocrinologist. He said, oh, challenge it out of your tissue. You did the wrong test. I think you have chronic mercury poisoning, because he said you do have a lot of those symptoms. And sure enough, that test was positive. But the bottom line is it was this perfect storm that occurred of stressors. And then getting it out, everything I teach now, cellular detox, I had to not only get it out of my cells, my body, but really what got my life back is getting it out of my brain. And of course, I've trained doctors around the world in this process. I got my sleep back, my digestion back, all these things back. Yes, I was left in this state of chemical sensitivity. One smell of a chemical and I'd be reactive and feel terrible for 2 days. That is basically a PTSD reaction. The body basically puts you into this hyper state because it's trying to save your life, but it gives you these emotional even experiences that I didn't like at all. So that is how this all applies, and that's how I got here.
Got it. Thank you again for sharing that. Let's talk about, obviously our viewers today are people who struggle with PTSD, or maybe someone in their family or their friends do. So what's the link between detoxing and someone who has struggled with PTSD? How can that help them?
Well, because let's go back to what I said originally. The body doesn't know the difference between physical, chemical, and emotional stress. If these stressors come together, and basically that's what creates that perfect storm. And now your body is in this survival mode. There's a place in your brain, it's this primitive brain, the limbic area of the brain. And all it wants to do is survive, right? That's why you'll create too much inflammation if you hurt yourself and we ice it or we do something, because it doesn't care about, long-term scar tissue. It wants to save your life. People go into, strokes. I'm sorry. I'm shock. I'm sorry. What is shock? It's the body trying to save its life, and then yet it could potentially kill you in a different way. So the bottom line is the body wants to save your life at all costs. It has to adapt. And that overreaction can set up this PTSD, whether it be chemical, physical, or emotional. But it's when these stressors build up. So to answer your question, we oftentimes can't get rid of these trapped emotions from a stressor. And that is years of therapy and other techniques, right? But these chemical stressors, it treats the body the same way, meaning the body reacts to this the same as it does these trapped emotions. So when we're looking at emptying the bucket, so imagine all of us having a certain size bucket. Some people are genetically more blessed. We can take more stress, bigger buckets. Some of us smaller buckets. But physical, chemical, emotional stress fills that bucket till one day it overflows, and we can call that the PTSD. Now, we have to empty the bucket of all the stressors. Some of them we can't get to, but some of them we can. So these stored chemical stressors at the cellular level, even in our brain, we can actually empty that load and therefore change this overreaction of the body. Bring it back down, empty the bucket. So imagine having 2 glasses of water, right? One half filled with stressors and one all the way, but right near the top, right? And we stress it a little bit and it just keeps overflowing and the water goes down and creates damage otherwise, but the one that's half filled, we can shake it a little more with stress and no symptoms, no water overflow. So we want to get our bucket to this. We want to empty that bucket to where it can take more stress, right? Without the reaction. When you're here, just that little bit of stress. So if we can empty the chemical load, now we can even start dealing with these other trapped emotions. And then we can get our body now to neurologically not think it's going to save its life. When your bucket's really full, your body's in a very defensive mode. And to back that off, we have to empty the bucket. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a really great way of describing it for sure. So, okay, so let's talk about like, how does one empty that bucket so that we get it down to a healthier level?
Yeah. I wish it were so simple. And, oftentimes when we have the allopathic medicine, regular medicine, if you will, right? They don't really have time for detox, right? I mean, they don't even understand, nor really should they. They're focused on emergency care, which is great. When they focus on degenerative conditions, they just throw medication at it, right? Which can make more problems. Then we have the alternative side, which they do understand the need of detox and removing stressors, but typically they're using things like chlorella, cilantro, the 10-day cleanse, the sauna. I don't have a problem with any of those, but you have to understand that I did all that. And honestly, and be honest with you, that they not only, some of them I just didn't get better. I thought maybe it helped for a little bit, and some made me worse, right? And I also went on this side where I was doing some IV chelation, made me worse. So, what I teach is in the middle. We have to use real chelators. Chlorella is not a real chelator. In a Petri dish, it looks like it is, but when you put it in the microbiome, it really isn't, right? So this side over here, they use real chelators, but they're putting a bunch into your body at once in an IV. It goes away, and then all this redistribution happens. Not a solution. Trust me, live that life out. I wrote 3 great articles when detox is dangerous. It focuses there. But it also focuses on these weak chelators that people use and how many of these had made me sick because they are weak. They're just, they pull a little bit and then it lets go and it redistributes, most of which ends up going across the brain and making you more crazy. So we have to use real chelators, but we have to use them correctly. And we have to use them at the cellular level. So my saying is you have to fix the cell to get well, whether it's PTSD or whatever it is that you're dealing with, but you have to specifically detox the cell to get well. And that's what I teach. So you got to get the cell doing what it was doing before you got sick, right? And that was getting rid of toxins day in, day out. When those pathways drop, now you're in big trouble. I don't care how many colon cleanses you do, you're not going to fix the cell. That's real detox.
For people who aren't aware, what are chelators?
Chelators grab toxins and don't let go. So some of which are more accepted in the medical world, if you will, DMPS. It has a sulfahedral group called a thiol group. It's like a crab that grabs and doesn't let go. But they IV it, and all of it goes in, but then it has a very short half-life in the body. It goes away, and then the body's still releasing toxins, which redistribute. Not good. On the alternative side, a chelator can be the same thing, like something like DMSA is being used, but it has to be used every 4 hours. You can't just take 1 or 2 pills a day, or even 3 pills a day. Otherwise, you get redistribution. So those are chelators. Another one that we use is cytodetox, which uses a cage. Literally, it holds it. They use this in environmental cleanups. where it grabs on to things like glyphosate, heavy metals, and it doesn't let go. But we can use them in our body in very specific forms. You have to be careful with some of these real killers because they carry a lot of toxic load, like the one in Detox. There's a couple different binders in what we call Detox Plus, but these things hold different toxins and they have to be clean before they can be used in the human body. Even carbon that many people use as a gut binder is very dirty oftentimes and makes people more toxic. You have to find clean binders and chelators.